My husband left me alone on my birthday to spend the entire day with his ex-wife, so I introduced his replacement at his mother's funeral. It was my 30th birthday, and my husband, Jerome, had promised we would spend the entire day together because it was a milestone. I had been talking about it for months. He made dinner reservations at the steakhouse I had wanted to try and told me he had taken the day off work. He said we would do whatever I wanted from morning until night. I woke up excited and made a special breakfast while Jerome was in the shower. His phone rang, and I saw it was his ex-wife, Natalie, calling. That alone felt strange because their divorce had been final for 5 years and they didn't have children together. Jerome answered, and I heard him say he would be right there and that Natalie needed him. He came out and told me Natalie's father had a heart attack, that she had no one else to call, and that he needed to be there for her. I said her father seemed to have a heart attack twice a year whenever she needed attention. Jerome knew that pattern, but he insisted this time was real and serious. He said he would be gone for just an hour to take her to the hospital and make sure she was okay. He promised we would still celebrate my birthday, just starting a little later. I watched him leave at 8 in the morning, wearing the clothes I had bought him for our anniversary, while I stayed behind in my birthday dress. 1 hour passed, then 2, then 4. Jerome texted to say Natalie was very upset and he couldn't leave her alone at the hospital. He said her father was stable, but she needed emotional support. I called him and heard Natalie laughing in the background at something on TV. When I asked if they were watching television at the hospital, Jerome said they had gone back to Natalie's apartment to pick up her insurance papers. At 2 in the afternoon, he said her father was being discharged and needed a ride home. At 4, he said Natalie needed help organizing her father's medications. At 6, he said she was too upset to cook, so they were getting dinner. At 8, when our reservation had long passed, he said Natalie had a panic attack and he couldn't leave. I spent my entire 30th birthday alone while my husband acted as caretaker for his ex-wife, who I believed was exaggerating everything like she always did. Jerome came home at midnight and found me sitting in the dark, still wearing my dress. He apologized but said emergencies happen and I should understand. He said Natalie had no one else and that he had promised her after their divorce that he would always be there as a friend. He accused me of being selfish for turning someone else's family crisis into an issue about my birthday. He even bought Natalie flowers from the hospital gift shop to cheer her up, while I received nothing. The next day, I learned from one of Jerome's friends that Natalie's father never went to the hospital. He had heartburn from eating too much pizza. Natalie had still called Jerome crying, knowing he would drop everything. She had done this before, on our anniversary, on Valentine's Day, and on Christmas morning. There was always an emergency that only Jerome could fix. Jerome's mother, Linda, thought it was sweet that Jerome stayed close to Natalie. She had always preferred Natalie over me and regularly commented on how pretty and successful Natalie was compared to me. Linda invited Natalie to family dinners and seated her next to Jerome while I sat at the end of the table like an afterthought. She showed people photos from Jerome and Natalie's wedding, saying those were happier times. That was when I reconnected with my ex-boyfriend, Nathan, whom I had dated before Jerome. Nathan was successful, attractive, and had always treated me with care. We started meeting for coffee as friends, just catching up. Nathan remembered details about me that Jerome had forgotten. He knew my coffee order, my favorite flowers, and my middle name. He listened when I spoke instead of scrolling through his phone. He also happened to look great in photos. 3 months later, Linda was diagnosed with terminal cancer and given about 6 weeks to live. The family was devastated, and Jerome spent every day at the hospital. Linda's final wish was to see her children happy and settled. She repeatedly asked Jerome if he regretted choosing me over Natalie. During visits, she held Natalie's hand and referred to her as the daughter she had always wanted. The funeral was held on a Saturday. Jerome gave a speech about what an incredible mother Linda had been. I sat in the front row in a black dress looking appropriately solemn. Halfway through the service, Nathan walked in, wearing an expensive suit and looking polished. He sat beside me and took my hand. Jerome noticed immediately and stopped speaking mid-sentence. Nathan leaned in and whispered something to me, and I smiled slightly. Jerome continued his speech, stumbling through it while watching Nathan comfort me. The reception at Linda's house felt crowded and stale, with too many people packed into rooms that smelled like old furniture and casserole dishes.
Jerome stood near the dining table, shaking hands and accepting hugs from relatives I barely knew. His speech notes were still crumpled in one hand as he greeted people automatically. I watched him glance at me, then at Nathan, then back at me, as if trying to understand what he was seeing. Natalie hovered close to Jerome, touching his arm and whispering things I couldn't hear. She tried to block his view of me, but he kept shifting to see past her. Nathan stood beside me with his hand resting lightly on my lower back. Several of Linda's friends noticed, and I heard one woman comment on how a good-looking couple we were. Jerome heard it too, and his face drained of color.
Linda's sister, Na, came over and gestured toward the kitchen. I followed her through the crowd, and she closed the door behind us. The kitchen still had Linda's magnets on the refrigerator and her handwritten grocery list on the side. Na crossed her arms and asked if Nathan was my boyfriend. Her voice was quiet but sharp, like she already knew the answer. I told her we had been seeing each other for 3 months. She repeated 3 months, clearly counting in her head. I said yes, the same 3 months Jerome had been running to Natalie every time she claimed there was an emergency. Na looked down and said she had watched Linda seat Natalie next to Jerome for years and heard her constantly compare me to Natalie. She said she understood why I would look for someone who appreciated me. She admitted it didn't make what I did at the funeral right, but she understood. The kitchen door opened and Jerome walked in. His face was flushed, his jaw tight. He told Na to leave. She hesitated, squeezed my arm, and walked out. Jerome shut the door hard enough to rattle the dishes. He demanded to know who Nathan was, keeping his voice low so the guests wouldn't hear. I leaned against the counter and said Nathan was someone who remembered my coffee order. Jerome looked confused, and I added that Nathan also knew my middle name and my favorite flowers. Jerome said that wasn't the point, and asked how long this had been happening and whether I was cheating. I told him I had been seeing Nathan since my birthday. Jerome started to mention Natalie needing help that day, but I cut him off and reminded him her father never went to the hospital. I said the emergency was heartburn, exactly as I had warned him. Jerome said Natalie was in crisis and needed support. I laughed and told him she had been in crisis every Christmas, Valentine's Day, and anniversary for 5 years. His voice softened, as if he was finally realizing something. I walked past him into the living room. Nathan was talking with Jerome's relatives near the fireplace, completely at ease. One of Linda's church friends asked Nathan about his job, and he explained he worked in finance. She said again how well we looked together and gave me an approving look I had never received from Linda. Jerome came out and froze when he heard the comment. Another relative asked Nathan how long we had known each other. Nathan said we had dated years ago and recently reconnected. He put his arm around my waist, and I leaned into him. It felt partly real and partly intentional. I wanted Jerome to see what he had overlooked while prioritizing his ex-wife. Natalie rushed over, loudly asking Jerome if he was okay and offering to take him home. She touched his arm with a practiced look of concern. Jerome pulled away and said he needed to speak to his wife. Natalie looked genuinely shocked. Jerome told her she had helped enough, using a tone I had never heard him direct at her. Natalie stood there, confused, then walked toward the kitchen. Conversations around the room slowed as people watched. By 4 o'clock, the reception began to wind down. Guests gathered their dishes and offered final condolences. Nathan and I stood near the door, and I could feel Jerome watching from the porch. Nathan opened the car door for me, and I slid into the leather seat. Before getting in himself, he leaned down and kissed my cheek. It was gentle but intentional, knowing Jerome could see. I didn't look back as we drove away. My hand shook slightly in my lap. Nathan drove me home and kissed me goodbye in the driveway. I went inside the house I shared with Jerome and began pulling clothes from the closet.
Linda's sister, Na, came over and gestured toward the kitchen. I followed her through the crowd, and she closed the door behind us. The kitchen still had Linda's magnets on the refrigerator and her handwritten grocery list on the side. Na crossed her arms and asked if Nathan was my boyfriend. Her voice was quiet but sharp, like she already knew the answer. I told her we had been seeing each other for 3 months. She repeated 3 months, clearly counting in her head. I said yes, the same 3 months Jerome had been running to Natalie every time she claimed there was an emergency. Na looked down and said she had watched Linda seat Natalie next to Jerome for years and heard her constantly compare me to Natalie. She said she understood why I would look for someone who appreciated me. She admitted it didn't make what I did at the funeral right, but she understood. The kitchen door opened, and Jerome walked in. His face was flushed, his jaw tight. He told Na to leave. She hesitated, squeezed my arm, and walked out. Jerome shut the door hard enough to rattle the dishes. He demanded to know who Nathan was, keeping his voice low so the guests wouldn't hear. I leaned against the counter and said Nathan was someone who remembered my coffee order. Jerome looked confused, and I added that Nathan also knew my middle name and my favorite flowers. Jerome said that wasn't the point, and asked how long this had been happening and whether I was cheating. I told him I had been seeing Nathan since my birthday. Jerome started to mention Natalie needing help that day, but I cut him off and reminded him her father never went to the hospital. I said the emergency was heartburn, exactly as I had warned him. Jerome said Natalie was in crisis and needed support. I laughed and told him she had been in crisis every Christmas, Valentine's Day, and anniversary for 5 years. His voice softened as if he was finally realizing something. I walked past him into the living room. Nathan was talking with Jerome's relatives near the fireplace, completely at ease. One of Linda's church friends asked Nathan about his job, and he explained he worked in finance. She said again how well we looked together and gave me an approving look I had never received from Linda. Jerome came out and froze when he heard the comment. Another relative asked Nathan how long we had known each other. Nathan said we had dated years ago and recently reconnected. He put his arm around my waist, and I leaned into him. It felt partly real and partly intentional. I wanted Jerome to see what he had overlooked while prioritizing his ex-wife. Natalie rushed over, loudly asking Jerome if he was okay and offering to take him home. She touched his arm with a practiced look of concern. Jerome pulled away and said he needed to speak to his wife. Natalie looked genuinely shocked. Jerome told her she had helped enough, using a tone I had never heard him direct at her. Natalie stood there, confused, then walked toward the kitchen. Conversations around the room slowed as people watched. By 4 o'clock, the reception began to wind down. Guests gathered their dishes and offered final condolences. Nathan and I stood near the door, and I could feel Jerome watching from the porch. Nathan opened the car door for me, and I slid into the leather seat. Before getting in himself, he leaned down and kissed my cheek. It was gentle, but intentional, knowing Jerome could see. I didn't look back as we drove away. My hands shook slightly in my lap. Nathan drove me home and kissed me goodbye in the driveway. I went inside the house I shared with Jerome and began pulling clothes from the closet.
I found my suitcases in the garage and started filling it with everything I would need for a few weeks. I packed shoes, toiletries, and the jewelry my grandmother left me. I was folding a sweater when I heard Jerome's car pull into the driveway. The front door opened and his footsteps moved down the hall. He appeared in the bedroom doorway, his eyes red from crying. He asked what I was doing, his voice breaking on the last word. I told him I was packing. Jerome walked into the room and said we needed to talk. He said he knew he had messed up on my birthday, but insisted we could fix it. I kept folding clothes and placing them into the suitcase. Jerome said my name 3 times, louder each time. I finally looked at him and said this wasn't about one birthday. I told him it was about 5 years of coming second to Natalie, 5 years of his mother treating me like I wasn't enough, 5 years of him calling me selfish whenever I asked for basic respect. Jerome's face fell, and he said that wasn't fair. His voice rose as he accused me of being the one who cheated. He said I was throwing away our marriage over one mistake. He repeated that Natalie was just a friend who needed help and that I was turning it into something it wasn't. I took out my phone and opened my calendar app. For 2 years, I had tracked every time Jerome canceled plans because of Natalie. I showed him the screen filled with red-marked dates. Christmas morning 2022, when he left before we opened presents because Natalie's pipes burst.
Valentine's Day 2023, when he missed our dinner reservation because her car wouldn't start. Our anniversary last year, when he spent the afternoon helping her move furniture. My birthday this year. At least 15 other dates highlighted in red. Jerome stared at the phone, his face going pale. He said he didn't realize it happened that often. I asked how he couldn't when I told him every time that Natalie was using him. Jerome sat on the bed and put his head in his hands. When he looked up, tears were running down his face. He said maybe he let Natalie manipulate him too much, but he swore he never had feelings for her. He said he never cheated and that what I did by bringing Nathan to his mother's funeral was worse. I laughed, and it sounded bitter. I said emotional abandonment was still betrayal, even if it wasn't physical. Jerome cried harder and said his mother had just died and I humiliated him at her funeral in front of everyone. I told him his mother had spent 5 years humiliating me at every family gathering while he stayed silent. I reminded him of Linda showing people wedding photos of him and Natalie, seating Natalie beside him at dinners while I sat at the end, and calling Natalie the daughter she wished for. Jerome said his mother was difficult, but she was still his mother. I understood that, but he chose to let her treat me badly and never defended me. I zipped the suitcase and told him I was staying with Sabina for a while. I said we needed space to decide whether the marriage could be saved. Jerome grabbed the suitcase handle and refused to let go. He said we could work through this if I gave him another chance. He said he would do anything to fix it. I pulled on the suitcase, but his grip stayed firm. I told him to let go, and he shook his head, saying he loved me and couldn't lose me. I yanked harder, and the suitcase slipped free. Jerome stood up and tried to block the doorway. I pushed past him, and he grabbed my arm. I told him not to touch me, and he let go immediately. He followed me down the hall, still talking. He promised to cut off contact with Natalie. He said he would go to counseling. He said he would do whatever I needed. I opened the front door and put the suitcase in my car. Jerome stood on the porch in the same spot where he had watched me leave with Nathan hours earlier. He was still pleading as I backed out of the driveway. In the rearview mirror, I saw him standing there alone as I drove away. Sabina's apartment smelled like red wine and takeout Chinese food when I arrived. She opened the door in sweatpants and pulled me inside after one look at my face. I dropped the suitcase in the hallway and sat on her couch while she poured 2 large glasses of wine. She sat across from me and waited. I told her everything, starting with the funeral, Nathan sitting beside me, and Jerome's reaction. I explained the fight at home, the calendar I kept, and how Jerome finally saw all the red dates and went pale. Sabina listened without interrupting. When I finished, she took a long drink of wine. She said Jerome deserved consequences for years of putting Natalie first. She said any husband who abandons his wife on her 30th birthday for his pecs earns what comes next. Then she leaned forward and said bringing Nathan to the funeral was harsh. She said it was deliberate, public, and meant to hurt Jerome right after his mother died. I didn't deny it. I told her I wanted him to feel the pain publicly that I had felt privately for years. Sabina nodded and asked if I actually had feelings for Nathan or if I was using him as a weapon against Jerome. I started to answer and realized I didn't know. Everything with Nathan had been tangled in my anger from the beginning. He remembered my coffee order, but was that love or just attentiveness? He listened to me, but was I drawn to him or simply relieved he wasn't Jerome? I admitted I couldn't separate my feelings for Nathan from my need to prove Jerome wrong. Sabina said I needed to figure that out before making permanent decisions about my marriage. 2 days after the funeral, Nathan took me to dinner at an Italian restaurant downtown. He wore a nice shirt, pulled out my chair, and asked how I was coping. I said I was staying with Sabina and didn't know what would happen next. Nathan reached across the table and held my hand. He said he could help me find my own apartment if I wanted, and that I deserved better than being treated like an afterthought. The waiter brought our food, and Nathan talked about work, asked about mine, and stayed attentive. But when he mentioned the funeral, I noticed something in his expression. He looked satisfied in a way that made me uneasy. He said Jerome's face when he saw us together was priceless. Hearing that word made me uncomfortable. Nathan spoke kindly, but his tone carried a competitive edge, as if he had won something. I began to wonder if Nathan had his own reasons for wanting to prove he was better than Jerome. Maybe what we shared was built more on rivalry and revenge than real connection. I finished dinner feeling uneasy, and unsure whether anything between us was genuine or if we were both using each other for the wrong reasons. Jerome called me 17 times over the next week. I blocked his number after the 5th call, but he started texting from different numbers. His messages shifted between apologies and accusations. He said he wanted to fix things, then accused me of throwing away 7 years over one bad birthday. He insisted Natalie was just a friend, then accused me of cheating by bringing Nathan to his mother's funeral. Eventually, I stopped reading. His brother Stefano called one Thursday evening. I almost ignored it, but answered. He said Jerome was barely eating and was falling apart. He said Jerome loved me and had made a mistake, and asked if I was really ending the marriage over one birthday. I told Stefano to look at the calendar I showed Jerome. I asked him to count how many times Jerome chose Natalie over me. Christmas morning, Valentine's Day, our anniversary, my birthday, at least 15 other dates. I asked him if he would accept that from his wife. Stefano went quiet. He said he didn't realize it was that many times. I told him Jerome didn't realize it either, because he never paid attention until I showed proof. Na called the next day with a different view. She said she had been thinking about everything. She admitted she noticed Jerome prioritizing Natalie for years and wondered why I stayed. I asked why she never spoke up. She sighed and said their mother encouraged Jerome to stay close to Natalie. Linda told Jerome that Natalie was the one who got away and that he owed her friendship after the divorce. Na said Linda compared me unfavorably to Natalie, both publicly and privately. She said Linda told Jerome that Natalie was prettier, more successful, and that he made a mistake marrying me. Na said she felt guilty for not defending me, but felt disloyal contradicting her mother. Sitting on Sabina's couch, I realized Linda never wanted Jerome to marry me. She spent 5 years trying to push him back towards Natalie, and Jerome allowed it because he couldn't stand up to his mother, even when it damaged his marriage. 2 weeks after the funeral, Jerome called again. I had unblocked his number the day before. He sounded uncertain and said Natalie called with another emergency. Her car broke down and she needed a ride to work. He asked if it was okay if he helped her. I told him he was an adult and could choose for himself, but if he went running to Natalie again, he would be proving my point. After a long pause, Jerome said he would tell Natalie to call someone else. An hour later, he texted that he told her to contact a tow truck. He said she got angry and accused him of abandoning him, and he told her he couldn't keep responding to every emergency because it was hurting his marriage. I didn't reply, but I saved the message. On Tuesday afternoon, I met with a divorce attorney. Her office was downtown with gray carpets and framed diplomas. She asked basic questions about the marriage, our assets, and whether we had children. She explained how everything would be divided and asked whether I wanted to pursue divorce or legal separation first.
I told her I didn't know yet. She said that was normal and handed me paperwork to review. Walking out of her office made everything feel more real and permanent. I sat in my car in the parking garage and cried. Even though Jerome had failed me again and again, ending a 7-year marriage still felt like losing something meaningful. We bought that house together. We talked about having children. We built a life, even if it was damaged. Walking away felt overwhelming and frightening, even though staying felt impossible. Nathan called that evening and asked how I was doing. I told him about meeting with the attorney. He said that was good and told me I should file for divorce right away. He said Jerome didn't deserve another chance after years of disrespect. He suggested I move in with him so we could start over. His enthusiasm made me pull back. I told Nathan I needed space to figure out what I wanted without pressure from him or Jerome. Nathan's tone changed. He asked if I was really considering going back to Jerome after everything. He said Jerome would fall back into old habits and that I was making a mistake giving him another chance. I told Nathan I needed to make my own decisions, and that meant distance from everyone. He said fine, but his voice made it clear it wasn't. When we hung up, his disappointment made me question his intentions even more. I started wondering whether he truly cared about me or just wanted to win against Jerome. Jerome showed up at Sabina's apartment on Saturday morning. Sabina answered the door and told him I didn't want to see him. Jerome asked her to at least give me something. Sabina came back holding flowers and a letter. The flowers were my favorite kind, the ones Jerome usually forgot. The letter was 3 handwritten pages on notebook paper. I sat on Sabina's couch and read it. Jerome apologized for every time he chose Natalie over me. He listed specific moments.
Christmas morning, 2022, when he left because Natalie's pipes burst. Valentine's Day, 2023, when he missed our dinner because a car wouldn't start. Our anniversary, when he helped her move furniture. And my birthday this year. He wrote that he failed to see the pattern because each situation felt like a one-time emergency. He admitted dismissing my feelings whenever I said Natalie was manipulating him. He acknowledged letting his mother disrespect me and never defending me. He apologized for calling me selfish when I asked for basic consideration on my milestone birthday. On the final page, he asked for a chance to prove he could change. He offered to cut off contact with Natalie and to attend marriage counseling. He said he loved me and didn't want to lose me. I folded the letter and put it in my purse. I told Sabina to let Jerome know I received it, but wasn't making promises. After years of broken commitments, actions mattered more than words. Luciano called me Monday afternoon. He worked with Jerome and said I needed to know something. Natalie had shown up at Jerome's workplace demanding to know why he was abandoning her. She claimed she needed support while grieving Linda, who she said had been like a mother to her. She accused Jerome of being cruel for ignoring her calls. Luciano said Jerome told Natalie their friendship was inappropriate and damaging his marriage. He said Jerome explained he needed clear boundaries. Natalie cried and accused Jerome of choosing me over her, saying it without any awareness of the irony. Luciano said Jerome looked shaken but didn't give in. I thanked Luciano and sat with that information. For the first time, Jerome had truly set boundaries with Natalie. I agreed to meet Jerome for coffee on Wednesday at a cafe near Sabina's apartment. He looked exhausted, with dark circles under his eyes. He ordered my coffee without asking because he finally remembered my order. We sat at a corner table and Jerome showed me his phone. Natalie's number was blocked. He showed me a message telling her not to contact him again. He told me he'd started individual therapy to understand why he allowed Natalie to manipulate him. He said his therapist helped him recognize how cruel his mother's behavior toward me had been and how he enabled it by staying silent. Jerome seemed genuinely committed to change, but I told him I didn't know if I could trust him again after years of feeling secondary in my own marriage. Jerome's eyes filled with tears. He said he understood and would do whatever it took to earn my trust back, even if it took years. I finished my coffee and told him I needed more time. He nodded and said he would wait as long as necessary. I met Luciano for lunch the next day at the restaurant where we had our first date years earlier. He suggested the place, which seemed thoughtful at first, but when I sat across from him, I noticed how pleased he looked. He ordered for both of us without asking and immediately started talking about apartments he'd found. I told him I needed to slow down and think about what I actually wanted, instead of jumping from Jerome to him. Nathan's smile disappeared. He asked what there was to think about after Jerome treated you poorly for 5 years. I told him Jerome was finally making real changes, blocking Natalie and going to therapy. Nathan's expression hardened. He said I was making a serious mistake and that people like Jerome never truly changed. He said Jerome would behave well temporarily, then return to his old habits the moment Natalie called. I told Nathan I appreciated his concern, but needed to work through my marriage without pressure. Nathan laughed, but it wasn't kind. He said I wasted 3 months supporting you just for you to go back to Jerome. In that moment, I realized he hadn't cared about my needs. He had been waiting for me to leave Jerome and choose him, treating everything like a competition. I told Nathan we needed to stop seeing each other while I focused on my marriage. 3 months after Linda's funeral, Jerome and I attended our first marriage counseling session. The therapist was a woman in her 50s who said she didn't run comfortable sessions. She asked why we were there. Jerome said he wanted to save the marriage and admitted his mistakes with Natalie. I talked about 5 years of feeling invisible while he prioritized his ex-wife.
The therapist listened and said we both made choices that harmed the marriage. She told Jerome his behavior was emotional abandonment, even without physical cheating. She asked why his ex-wife's needs mattered more than his wife's. Jerome said he felt responsible for Natalie after the divorce. The therapist asked if he realized he had been acting like Natalie's husband instead of mine. Jerome admitted he had never considered it that way. Then she turned to me and said bringing Nathan to the funeral was calculated public humiliation, motivated by revenge, not healing. She said I wanted to hurt Jerome instead of addressing the issues. When I tried to explain, she stopped me and said honesty mattered more than justification. She asked if we truly wanted to rebuild the marriage or if too much damage had been done. Jerome said he wanted to try. I said I wasn't sure, but I was willing to see if therapy helped. She gave us homework on identifying needs and boundaries. We left feeling exposed, but also clearer about the truth of our choices. 2 weeks into counseling, Na called me. She said Natalie contacted her, asking her to tell Jerome she was having a crisis and needed him. Na told Natalie that Jerome was working on his marriage and that she needed to respect his boundaries. Natalie cried and accused Jerome of abandoning her. Na stayed firm and said their friendship had been inappropriate for years and needed to end. Na said she felt proud of Jerome for finally standing up to Natalie. She apologized for staying silent while Linda favored Natalie and treated me as less than. She admitted Linda encouraged Jerome to stay close to Natalie and repeatedly told him Natalie was the one who got away. Na said the family enabled the situation by treating Natalie like family while making me feel like an outsider. She told me things were changing now that Linda was gone and people were recognizing how unhealthy those dynamics were. Jerome's brother was also beginning to see how neglected I'd been. I thanked Na for speaking up and blocking Natalie's attempts to reach Jerome. 6 months after Linda's funeral, Jerome and I moved back together after living apart during intensive therapy. We weren't fixed, and likely never would be completely, but we were more honest. Jerome hadn't contacted Natalie since setting boundaries at work. He actively prioritized our marriage by keeping plans, asking about my day, and paying attention to my life. I still carried anger from years of feeling invisible. The therapist said that was normal and something to work through over time. Our relationship felt different now, built on Jerome finally seeing me as his priority and me learning to speak up before resentment took over. We began planning a small vow renewal, just the two of us. No family, no audience, just a private commitment. Jerome suggested writing our own vows this time and meaning them. I agreed because I wanted promises based on who we were now, not who we pretended to be 7 years earlier.